Legge and Matt DeBary, another edition of Riding Home. It's Monday. Tua Tagovailoa has decided to leave to go to the NFL, which leaves essentially Jake Fromm. And class to start Tuesday, so at any moment here, including during this podcast, this show, we could hear what's going on there. I think everybody feels like this is a 50-50 thing, Matt. But over the your view of the world of the Jake Fromm situation, then we'll get into some recruiting stuff.
Yeah, I do think he's leaning towards staying. I don't think he got the draft grade that he was expecting. At least that's what we were kind of hearing last week. But I think he probably should come back after the year that he just had. I don't want to say he regressed. A lot of people might say that, but he definitely had a better freshman and sophomore campaign than he did last fall. So I think Jake wants to prove that he is one of the best quarterbacks in the country after last year and, cement his Georgia legacy as, a winner. He's obviously won a lot of big games, but he hasn't won that national championship. They should be reloaded and restocked, ready to go next year. He's got some weapons. The defense is obviously going to be very, very good. So I do think with Jake Fromm, if he decides to come back, that Georgia should make another, national championship caliber run. So I do think it's in his best interest to come back, and I do think that's what he will do in the next day or hour or even minute.
Huh. Yeah, it's tough to do these shows in the middle of all this stuff. One thing, there's a couple of guys I would keep kind of an eye on as it relates to where Georgia with Georgia's with the situation with Jake right now. I mean, honestly, we don't know. I mean, my suspicion is that he will come back. But if someone's saying, "Oh, well, I think he's going to leave," I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong because frankly, we don't know, and it's not an easy thing to figure out. Particularly, I mean, I think the Fromms have been extremely quiet about all of this. This time a year ago, Jake would have left. So if that makes you think one way or the other, then go ahead. But I think there's two guys to watch: former Stanford quarterback KJ Costello, who is in the portal now, I think, and then Wake Forest quarterback Jamie Newman. Those two guys are guys to watch for sure. We've heard their names for a little bit of time now. And then obviously you still have Stetson, Dwan Mathis, and Carson Beck, who are in town now at Georgia. So I'll say this about whoever the quarterback is at Georgia in 2020. They're inheriting a heck of an offense, frankly. I mean, when you look at these receivers that are coming in, Georgia has loaded up. On my, how I keep things and watch things, Matt, is I have this big board, as you know, and I keep track of every single player as they work their way through their eligibility at Georgia. And signing 3 top 100 players at wide receiver to go along with George Pickens and Don Blaylock when he gets back, not to mention Matt Landers, Demetrius Robertson, Kearis Jackson, I think could certainly have a good year next year. These are guys that, Georgia shouldn't have an issue at wide receiver next year.
No, the receiver room is going to be very young, again, but very talented. I've spoken with parents of numerous Georgia, now signees, and, they say the biggest change in this class is going to be the receiver room. It's going to be flipped. And again, it's going to be very young, but man, I mean, the 2019 and 2020 receiver haul that Georgia's brought in is very good. We've seen it already with the 2019s with George Pickens, who's turned out to be the freak that we thought he was. Don Blaylock had some big plays this year before he got hurt. And then you're adding just more size and obviously speed with Arian Smith and Jermaine Burton. Marcus Rosemy is as reliable as it gets, you look at wide receivers in this 2020 class. And then Justin Robinson is a 6'4" guy who's finally healthy, and he's kind of the under the radar guy in this class, the home state kid. So much talent there. And that wide receiver room is obviously flipped and could be a strength of this team in the 2021 and 22 seasons when these guys start getting older. But, like you said earlier, before this year, we thought this was obviously Jake Fromm's last year. And,
right.
He would be a first-round pick, and it looked like he was going to be. But now you look at all the other quarterbacks in this class. Obviously, Joe Burrow probably going number 1. Tua, a lot of people like Justin Herbert out of Oregon, even though he's also had his struggles this year. Like Jake has.
Those 3 for sure are in front of Jake. I don't think there's much question about that.
someone's going to reach and get Jacob Eason because that arm talent hasn't
Right.
gone anywhere. He can still throw it 75 yards down the field. I think teams are going to fall in love with his arm. You've got the Utah State kid that people like. So, I mean, Fromm has, he's probably looked at as behind most of those guys, maybe not all of them, but I do think it's a good quarterback class in 2020. And then you have obviously Trevor and Justin, if he decides to stay as a senior, and he'll be, entering the draft with those guys. So there's definitely a lot to think about if you're Jake. But at the end of the day, I do think he's going to come back. I don't know that for sure. I'm not sure anyone outside the family knows for sure. But I think that's what I'm kind of anticipating with, again, who knows how much longer this is going to go on.
Well, frankly, Jake may not know. He may have a particular suspicion about what he thinks he wants to do. I think he's probably still gathering data. Georgia starts school on Tuesday, and the NFL draft, the deadline is not until the 20th, I believe. So it's still some way away. I did want to, on the same path though, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks in the playoff this year are transfers. 2 of them in their first year at that particular school. I don't know if Georgia gets a transfer who they'll wind up with. And I'm not going to sit here and act like Carson Beck is Trevor Lawrence. But we've also seen, he could be Jake Fromm. We've also seen guys like Trevor, Jake, Jalen at Alabama. They've all played as true freshmen. So in the college football playoff. So just because you're losing a guy who's done a lot doesn't mean, well, frankly, it doesn't eliminate you from anything. It just means that you're going to have to change some things. I mean, the whole drumbeat this offseason was that Alabama and Clemson would play the national championship game again, that Tua Tagovailoa would go number 1 overall in the draft. We don't know anything right now about this time next year, and the ridiculousness of the way that people act like something is a certainty. There are no certainties in sports, certainly not in college football. But when you do look, Matt, at this board for the Dawgs in the coming season, I mean, today, they have 85 guys essentially on scholarship. That includes guys like Jake Fromm, Ben Cleveland, Solomon Kinley, people like that. And then, they're not done with their 2020 class. There's always attrition in the world of college football, and at Georgia that's going to be no different. But right now they have 4 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 12 receivers, 4 tight ends, 18 offensive linemen, of which several are 2-dot players or top 100 players, 12 defensive linemen, 13 linebackers, of which almost everyone is a 2-dot player, 16 defensive backs, and 2 specialists. We're going to have to see Zirkle come in and play well. Now, that's someone we don't know anything about, and he's going to have to come in and play well. But, hey, man, the pieces are all there, just like they were in 17 and 18 and 19. I mean, even I would say in 19, we didn't quite know it, but the pieces weren't as good, maybe, particularly at receiver, as we could have suspected because of the injuries along the way.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I do think the defense is going to continue to get better. I mean, they were already one of the best defenses in school history. Didn't give up a single rushing touchdown to a running back all year. Just gave up 2. They were both to mobile quarterbacks who kind of sneaked their way in there. But Georgia's going to be able to hold teams to under 20 points on a consistent basis next year, unless they run into this amazing Joe Burrow type of player. They'll be fine. I think they're adding so much athleticism on the defensive line too, and so I think while they've lost some veterans in this group, I think they're just restocking, reloading, and a lot of these defensive backs are starting to emerge, especially Lewis Seen at safety. So you are losing a guy like J.R. Reed, but I do think the defense should probably be better next year than it already was. The receiver rooms are going to get better. We don't know about running back yet. Obviously, losing DeAndre Swift is a giant loss. Yeah. But Kendall Milton can come in and play, and there's still uncertainty whether if they'll bring in a second running back in this class.
I think the backs are just going to be different than Swift. Yeah. I mean, these going to be physical brutal backs. I mean, McIntosh is a very sudden guy, Kenny McIntosh, but Zamir has changed his style. Uh, Kendall Milton is a big bruiser. I mean, he can run away from people too, but that running backs room is going to be different because for the last 3 years they've had DeAndre Swift, and since 2014 they've had a breakaway guy because they've either had DeAndre or they've had Sony,
Yeah.
and who is the breakaway person? I would have thought it would have been Zamir a couple of years ago, but right now leading into this season, Zamir's style has changed. Zamir's
There's no
style
doubt
has
about that.
changed.
I mean, that he's and he'll get better too. I think year 2 after these knee surgeries, we might be able to see a different type of Zamir, but Kendall's a guy who breaks tackles.
Yes.
And I really think it's going to be up to the offensive line. Obviously, losing 2 guards. The 2 tackles, and maybe a guard if you want to throw Ben Simmons in there. Ben Cleveland, excuse me. So the offensive line will be a little bit different, and that's okay. I mean, those guys are really good, but it's not like Georgia ran all over everyone this year as they did in 2017 and 2018. But again, they've got enough talent there. What Sam Pittman's done, the past few years, they should be fine. They're just reloading with more 5-star guys. So
it's hard to not see them as the favorite in the East. And if Fromm comes back, it's hard not to see them as a favorite in the conference, frankly. I mean,
if you're going to play Alabama on the road, it would be nice to have a veteran, experienced guy like Jake Fromm who's played against Alabama before.
Right.
I think that might be the biggest deal for him. But either way, Georgia's going to have a really good team. But at the end of the day, I think they will be better with Jake Fromm back there.
Oh, I think they'd be better, but I don't know. We don't know what sort of phenomenon can happen in these one-year situations, or, could anyone possibly have predicted that Fromm would have won the Rose Bowl in his first year? I mean, that seems impossible to think of, but when you look at the schedule that Georgia plays, Virginia shouldn't be able to score on Georgia, then East Tennessee, and then you go at Alabama. That's probably the most challenging game, I would think. Louisiana Monroe, Vanderbilt, and Auburn at home. Auburn's going to present challenges. You go to Missouri with a brand new coach out there. The Gators have not figured out really how to score on Georgia these last couple of years with Dan Mullen as their head coach. You go to Carolina, and then you host Tennessee late. Maybe Tennessee will be better in 2020. I don't know. And then at Kentucky, and you close with Tech. I mean, Alabama sticks out, Auburn sticks out, Florida sticks out. I mean, what else is new? I mean, it always seems to come down to, are you going to play well against the Gators so that you can get to Atlanta?
And Jake Fromm has absolutely done that. If there's one thing he's done in his 3-year career, it's beat the Florida Gators and play well against Florida.
Well, but I mean, someone's going to be the quarterback after Jake Fromm. I mean, everybody was so sold that Jacob Eason was going to take Georgia to the promised land. We can't know. I mean, what big game, by the way. I mean, Tua has been it was an exceptional quarterback, particularly when Alabama had the lead. What big game did Tua win that he started?
That he started is a good question. I mean, they beat, I guess, LSU 2 years ago. I mean, that was a big deal at the time.
The 2019 LSU game was a big deal for sure. What was it? 2018 LSU game was a big deal. You said 2 years ago. I'm getting curveballs here. Once we go into the new year, it gets confusing for me.
Right. I think he beat Auburn once, but he's definitely had his moments, and he's beat up on a lot of kind of bad, weaker teams in the SEC and elsewhere. But that was big news that he was leaving. I don't think anyone thought he would be coming back, but they've got to make it work with Mac Jones, and we'll see how good he is.
He's just got to not throw interceptions. I mean, that's the biggest thing for him. But I mean, Alabama's going to be a very different team next year.
And Georgia's going to present a lot of, what am I trying to say? A lot of threats, I guess, to Mac Jones. They're going to make it difficult, even playing in Tuscaloosa.
That's a 50-50 game to me. I mean, I don't know who will be favored in it. My suspicion would be you would think Alabama would be favored just because it's on the road. But, they're not the same team this year as they have been in the past. And now they lose a guy who, looking back on it, Alabama hadn't exactly won as many national championships lately as they did in their heyday in the early 2000 teens. So, I mean, they're a hell of a program, but they did not finish 2019 the way that they wanted to. There's just no question. And they will have transition there. I mean, you start talking about the receivers that they're losing. I mean, there's issues there. Everyone has issues. I mean, Florida has issues. Bama, Auburn probably, I would think, is going to be better than people suspect. But if you're Georgia, Georgia has lost one game in the last each season. The last 3 seasons, they've lost one game in the regular season. Sometimes you could see it coming. Maybe not the way in which they lost, and sometimes, like this past year against South Carolina, you couldn't see it coming. But the margin of error for Georgia is significant.
And I think it's good for both teams that it's earlier in the year, because whoever loses that game still has, national championship. They're still in the run.
Well, the only SEC team that has gotten into the college football playoff without winning the conference has been Alabama.
Right. And they would have to have, LSU or Auburn obviously beat them and lose to whoever in the SEC title game, probably Georgia again. But, I mean, it's going to be a long off season. It was last year, too. And Georgia should have another really good year. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. And it's all going to start, about Jake Fromm and his decision that he's got coming up very soon.
Well, I don't think he's got very long to make it here. I mean, obviously, it's the 20th is the deadline, but my suspicion is this will happen this week. And we'll just have to see. I mean, our suspicion is that he's sticking around, but we don't know. I mean, right. we just do not know. And if he were to leave, that wouldn't exactly be stunning.
Right.
Not for this duo, at least.
Or the end of the world.
No, and I think that's exactly right. I don't think it's the end of the world at all. I mean,
right.
Kirby Smart has done a pretty good job of figuring out how to replace people with transfers. I mean, you start talking about Mo Smith, J.R. Reed. I mean, there have been important transfer players. I can't remember how to pronounce the punter's name that came in for the 2017 season, but
Nizelek.
He was
Cameron Nizelek.
He was unbelievably good. So
Eli Wolf had the big game-saving or winning catch against Florida this year. He wasn't great the whole year, but he's a guy who came in and played a lot.
And
Lawrence Cager.
I can't believe I didn't mention Lawrence Cager, but they've done well with transfer kids, and we'll just see what they do. I mean, playing at Georgia is going to be about as high as you can get for anyone who would think about transferring in, and that's, it's not playing at Maryland. This is a legitimate place to play and go win a national championship. All right, Dean Legge, Matt DeBary, thanks for joining us for another edition of the Riding Home here on Dog Post. Hopefully, all this stuff will get solved soon. Make sure to subscribe and click on the video up there. I'm going to link you to the 3 most important players coming into this 2020 class.